what are you starting to see in adoption of AI, and how is that changing project workflows?
When you really look at what was the disruptor, you need to go back to when Autodesk released Civil 3D and BIM, right? Those truly transformed the industry by enabling, efficient 3D design, allowing us to design in 3D. And what does that do, right? As an engineer in land development, there's a lot of things that go into a site plan. Really what AI does, AI advances this by, again, multidiscipline, working in these projects, it really allows us to verify documents against standards, summarize.
AI is rapidly entering civil and site workflows, but many firms are still figuring out where it adds value versus where it creates noise. So, what's actually changing on the ground today, and how are leading teams applying AI in ways that actually improve project outcomes? In this episode, we're joined by Ron Lezott, Senior Principal and Design Director of Civil and Site and Executive Committee Member at Colliers Engineering Design. With over 2 decades of experience in land development and multidisciplinary project delivery, Rod brings a practical perspective on integrating emerging technologies into engineering workflows. We'll speak about how civil and site teams are adopting AI across project phases, how to identify the right opportunities without overcomplicating processes, and how to balance AI tools with sound engineering judgment. And if you're looking to better understand where AI fits into your projects and how to apply it in a way that actually strengthens outcomes, this episode will give you a clear, real-world insights that you can start using right away. But before we jump in, I wanted to tell you about our next AEC PM Connect event, a series of in-person events we've created at EMI for AEC project managers and the leaders who develop them. If you want to stay on top of PM trends, elevate your team, and deliver stronger project results, these full-day events are built for you. We're coming to New Jersey this June and Kansas City this October of 2026. Learn more and register at aecpmconnect.com. And with that, let's jump into today's episode. It's now time for our conversation of the week with Ron Lezott. Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to it.
Yes, sir. So I know, Ron, we had a nice chat here prior on a couple of things that you guys are doing. So we'll just jump right into it. So Ron, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you're at in your career, and then how your role has kind of merged into this intersection of engineering leadership and artificial intelligence?
Sure. Again, my name is Ron Lezott. I'm a licensed PE in the state of New Jersey. I work for Colliers Engineering Design, which is a part of Colliers International. We are the engineering arm of Colliers. We're a multidiscipline, national firm. We specialize in engineering and architecture. So what I like to tell people, we are essentially one-stop shopping, for your land development needs. I have over 30 years experience in land development, currently serve as the division director for the civil site group, which includes land development, landscape architecture, water resources throughout the country. The one thing that, as a leader and as an engineer, right, we're always seeking ways to gain an advantage in what we do, right? Whether it's, simplifying workflows, everything we do ties around the entitlement process, right? So there's always time involved in that. And when you deal with our clients, right, what's most important to our clients, right? It's time and money. How fast can you get it done, right? How fast can we get our doors open, and how much is it going to cost me, right? So really technology is a big part of that, right? And when you look at the advancements and so forth, what AI has brought to the industry is, it definitely has helped people work more efficiently, reducing workflows, and with that, right, it saves the client time and money.
Absolutely. And Ron, I love your background here, because I think the most dangerous engineer equipped with AI is an experienced one. And it's right. So you get a lot of young guns who don't have a ton of experience. They get into the tools, and it can be easy to kind of go off the rails, right? So I know Colliers is fortunate to have your guidance specifically at that level, because you can, right, you've walked the walk on the engineering side, then you know what you're doing in this crazy world we found ourselves in. So I think your team's lucky to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. So, Baran, so let's go down that civil site route. What are you starting to see in adoption of AI, and how is that changing project workflows?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you almost need to take a step back, right? When you look at technology and engineering, civil engineering in particular, right? There have been many disruptors in the industry, right? This goes back to, the calculators that we use, right? I still use my Hewlett Packard 48
Mm-hmm.
GX, right? I mean, great calculator, you know, trusted companion. But really, when you really look at what was the disruptor, you need to go back to when Autodesk released Civil 3D and BIM,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those truly transformed the industry by enabling, efficient 3D design, allowing us to design in 3D. And what does that do, right? As an engineer in land development, there's a lot of things that go into a site plan. The main part is your mass grading, right? It allows you to balance sites, conflict detection, right? There's always conflicts with the underground utilities, whether it's stormwater, sanitary, or utilities. Allows us to generate faster profiles and really kind of update on the run, right? And again, a lot of the projects that we work on are multidiscipline, right? So you're working with the architect who's designing in BIM, we're designing in Civil 3D, and you're able to kind of merge those two. Really what AI does, AI advances this by, again, multidiscipline, working in these projects. It really allows us to like verify documents against standards, summarizing regulations and communications, right? We're in a highly regulated industry right now. And the biggest thing is streamlining workflows.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always a big proponent of, you know, building a better mousetrap, right? No matter what you've done 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even last year, there's always ways to improve. And, again, one of my mottos is how do we build a better mousetrap, right? How can we continue to improve on what we do? And I think AI is a big proponent of that.
Love it, Ron. And I think what's great about it is there's a spot for everybody depending on how they work. From like, you can get a plugin for your spreadsheet that maybe you haven't touched in a couple years, to, MCP server to actually wire up Revit, Civil 3D,
Yep.
structural analysis software, no matter like what discipline you're in, to actually get work done more efficiently. There's, as you know, there's some danger to doing that, but there's also a lot of opportunity. So that being said, so then, you can do anything with AI. How do you identify the right opportunities to apply to your discipline without overcomplicating things, getting people lost, etc.?
Yeah. I mean, look, and when you look at all the different, formats that are out there with AI, like, we always say off the shelf, right? It's very easy to get overwhelmed, right? Because there's so many options, right? Is it ChatGPT? Is it Copilot? Is it Gemini? The one thing that, we always stress is like, look, let's start simple, prioritize what it is that you're looking to do. Workflows differ, they differ by roles, right? Whether you're a project manager or a design engineer, so you really need to look at, how you could better organize what you're doing as an engineer. But again, look, we still can't sacrifice quality, right? In our
Mm-hmm.
industry, quality is a main part, right? It's what defines us as a company. So again, quality is at the top, right? And there's no way to sacrifice that. But again, when you look at the roles and the workflows, right? AI really helps you organize, summarize job specific emails, RFPs. Design engineers are constantly referencing, you know, regulations, whether it's tied to land use or environmental regulations. And what this does is it really kind of pulls it together in one document, right? Instead of referencing multiple documents, right? Because again, look, that's what computers, that's what PDFs have allowed you to do, to have 20, 30 different windows open on your computer, and AI kind of pulls that into one, right? And it's
Yeah.
easy to reference, right? You're not constantly multitasking. And again, it just allows you to focus on prioritizing needs and tackling tasks gradually.
Absolutely. And it is cool because you can, right, if you, whatever interface you use, the chat interfaces are common. If you can work out of
Yep.
that one interface
Yep.
per task, per project, it is really cool. And like, you gave a ton of examples, but I think what's most important, right, is like I said, judgment, taste, curation. So like somebody in your seat who's, right, like I said, walk the walk, what to do. And then you can actually develop strategy to help lead your team through something new, but applying what you've seen through your experience, which I think is extremely important and understated too.
Yeah.
In the AEC industry, skilled project managers are the backbone of success. EMI's AEC PM certification offers tailored training, ongoing support, and exclusive access to premium content that keeps your team sharp and effective. From foundational training to advanced leadership tools, set your team apart with certified growth. Learn more at aecpm.com. That's aecpm.com.
Yeah, and look, and that's what I loved when I was a project manager, right? Is really taking a step back and always evaluating how I could do it better, right?
Mm-hmm.
How I could do it better, how I could do it more efficiently, and again, without sacrificing quality and also the expectations of the client, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not having to cost more money and so forth. And again, AI it's just amazing with, the speed at what it's able to, query, large amounts of data. And it really kind of pulls it all together for you.
Absolutely. And then, getting even more specific. So talk to me about, early phases in civil design.
Yeah.
So like site selection, due diligence, right? If you guys get into the environmental side. So how does AI apply to like that, early end of the project?
Yeah. And again, we kind of spoke about it earlier, when you look at land development, and again, no matter what state you're in, it is a highly regulated industry. And again, every site is not perfect, right? A site might be zoned accordingly, and it's funny, right? Somebody could come and say, hey, look, I have a 100-acre site and this is what I want to build. And all of a sudden you look at it and you're like, okay, well, at the end of the day, based on the constraints, you have environmental constraints on your property, wetlands, floodway, or whatever, you have access issues. So now instead of really developing 100 acres with X amount of square footage, now you're really only developing 25 acres, right? So you just lost 75 acres to the constraints. Access could be an issue with, the allowable square footage that you could do, especially if it's on a state highway. So it's typical in the industry and with our clients, we do a lot of desktop reviews first to kind of really evaluate the site to make sure if it's going to move forward. But again, you're still pulling or referencing from a lot of different documents, right? You're looking at zoning, you're looking at tax maps, you're looking at environmental maps, flood maps, and so forth. Again, the benefit of AI is that you, based on certain queries and guide rails that you set up for the specific site, again, AI summarizes that into one easily referenced document. And again, just the amount of time it saves, right? Because again, when you look at, a lot of these searches are based on the internet, right? So AI is literally querying large amounts of unstructured data. And then it's really coming back to you with a structured summary that now you can go back to your client and say, yes, this site makes sense, or no, and this is why it might be better to move on. Because, again, talking about the client, a lot of our clients, it's amazing how much money is spent on dead deals, right? Because sometimes up front you need to look at, we need to get geotech out there. What are the subsoils? What's that impact going to be? Survey, right? Let's get an ALTA survey. Let's find out, what the encumbrances are on the property and so forth through an ALTA. So sometimes before they jump into that, which could cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, this desktop review is very important. And then they can kind of weigh their risks on whether or not they want to proceed with it.
Yeah, and that's a great method because, right, it's obviously if you don't have to send somebody out to the field or collect samples or do anything in the physical world, right, it's a lot more economical for you guys to actually do your desk review, and it's all digital at that point.
Absolutely.
So Ron, what tends to surprise engineers the most when they start integrating AI day to day? And I see you laughing because like, and I'm thinking maybe we're going down the same path, right? Because it's like it's never seems to be what you expect, and it's always kind of like it's like the Forrest Gump box of chocolates, if you will.
It is. I mean, look, the thing that impressed me was really the speed. Like again, before AI came out, right? We've all done Google searches, we all done internet searches, and then all of a sudden it provides all different references. Then you got to go in and check and like, okay, that doesn't match. That doesn't match. Oh, this matches what I need to find. And again, when you look at these searches, you could spend 20, 30 minutes, right? AI probably in less than a minute can get you the pertinent information that you want.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, and we'll talk about this later, right? Sometimes you have those, hallucinations that they talk about with AI, sometimes it'll make it better. And that's where the human aspect comes in to be able to validate it and so forth. But really, I think the biggest thing is the speed and what it gets you the information. And then also, really how it can help with, the efficiency of our engineers on how they go about their daily workflows.
Absolutely. And I think too, Ron, like you bring up this great point of that human in the loop engineering judgment. So then talk to me about like where does engineering judgment continue to fit into this conversation, particularly when you're dealing with stuff that's not so straightforward, which right, the more and more I think about it, when is anything in our field ever straightforward, right?
Yeah, exactly. Look, I mean, a term that we like to use, right, is we're the trusted advisor, right? Engineering is a great industry, right? Obviously you have your education, right? You have your licensing process and so forth. But really, what always comes into it is the expertise, right? Being able to look at an aerial of a site and be able to point out right off the bat, hey, we're going to have to look into flood hazard. We're going to have to look into access, being able to do that. So that's where the expertise comes into, right? And being able to, based on experience, maybe be able to cost certain things of a project, right? Because again, it's not only the design cost, but it's also the construction cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how things go together. So really when you look at it, when you look at AI generated information that comes back, right, you still need to validate it. And a great example is, we did a test using two different platforms. And what we did was we just specified a simple scope, cutting in a new roadway through a wooded lot. We gave the overall length of the road, the width of the road. We threw in some parameters for street lighting, drainage, and so forth, right? That this wasn't designed, right? The client just wanted to have an understanding of what it would cost. And using those two platforms, right? Because again, we wanted to compare and so forth. You got two completely different outcomes, right? And the outcome that I'm talking about is price. There was probably about a $250,000 difference between the two. So when you really started digging into it, again, we always talk about, is it apples to apples or are you looking at apples and oranges, right? And when we really dug into it, the quantities were accurate, the material costs were accurate, but the one actually went with additional considerations, right? They went with site clearing. They added in erosion and control measures on the project, right? Which is part of what we do. Added in contractor contingencies. So at the end of the day, I know sometimes clients, they want to kind of migrate to the lower cost one, but at the end of the day, the higher cost one was the one that made sense. And that really required engineering, our experience and our expertise to go in and say, okay, yes, this makes sense. A lot of times when you're looking at cost estimates, sometimes you can really tell when, okay, look, that's not what it costs. It's going to be a lot less than that, right? So that was really kind of what we looked at in here, but it was amazing how the material costs and the quantities were right on, but it was the additional considerations that it threw in that, yes, this makes sense. So we kind of took the higher price and we kind of threw a little bit more on top of it as well. Because again, when you look at this industry right now, especially with the supply chain, inflation and so forth, you are going to get some variations in the ultimate pricing when it's said and done.
Absolutely. And 2 points there on. So like context. And what AI actually makes really easy, right, is to get that incredibly valuable institutional knowledge out of your people's heads onto paper so everybody can follow it, right? So that judgment and that skill is so critical. And then, and our industry as well, my background's concrete restoration. So even if if you've ever chain dragged like a parking deck, and you mark it all out, you measure it, and you still, you need that 15-ish% contingency because you just don't know.
Yeah.
And it's
and also, again, expertise, sometimes people get caught in their ways. Sometimes with AI, it also might approach a problem in a different way, right? And because we always challenge our engineers the same way, like, okay, this is the way you're looking at it. Is there any other way to look at it that can help benefit, right? So there are ways where even the expertise and the experience come in that might be like, hey, you know what? I never really thought of it that way. This makes sense. And, again, it's like everything else, right? You read books to improve, you read books, new regulations come out and you kind of go through them, you look to understand them and so forth. But like I said, sometimes changing the way you look at things are good as well.
Yeah. And just getting hands on the tools, trying it out, right? Trial and error in controlled environments, where it's safe to experiment. So all great ways of, sharpening the sword, improving the practice.
Absolutely.
So, and Ron, I think you also have a unique perspective because, we were talking earlier, you guys have got 90 offices across the country. So in your mind, biggest challenges trying to scale AI initiatives across not only multidisciplinary teams, but just a large company with a lot of physical locations?
Yeah. So first focusing on the multidiscipline part, right? Like I said, when you have multidisciplines, right? Survey, geotech, traffic, environmental, planning, architecture, right? We all deal with, the regulations that are applicable to our craft, right? Rules, regulations, building codes, they all vary across the different disciplines. And really what AI does, because look, that has always been, like when you look at what an architect does or what a civil engineer does, right? I always explain it at, a civil engineer on a land development project, you are the quarterback of that project, right? You are coordinating with the survey, the traffic, the geotech, the environmental. You're also coordinating with the architect, or sometimes it can be vice versa. Sometimes the architect is running the project and stuff, but you're dealing with multidisciplines. And when you look at these types of projects, especially sophisticated projects, I mean, you're talking, we're preparing our own reports. Geotechnical's preparing their report. Traffic's preparing, and within every report or specification, that ties into what we are now developing in our plans, right? We got to make sure that, if geotech is recommending over excavation in a specific area due to subsoil conditions, we got to make sure that that's addressed in our plans, right? Not just say, okay, refer to the report. So again, we're constantly, referencing or tying back to whether it's specific pavement thickness, for us, if the building square footage changes, I got to make sure I get that back to the traffic engineer, right? So that they can update their report based on trips. So what AI allows us to do is really cross-check plans versus reports versus specs versus client requirements, and also versus the jurisdictional agency on it. So that's where the value really comes in. And then also being as large as we are, I'm sure you can imagine, look, there's a lot of times in a specific state where, we've done projects and those projects might not have been just strictly land development. It might have just been a survey, might have just been a geotech or a traffic. We have we have mechanisms in house where I can kind of identify, who, what the project was, where it was, but it doesn't really tell me what was done, right? Or what was the result of that project, right? Was it an environmental issue? Were there issues from a geotechnical standpoint? Survey, how'd that work? Or if it was on a state highway, how traffic addressed it. So now by using AI, we're able to query all that, again, unstructured data, and kind of pull it in together into like one concise summary. So now I'm able to research historical data that almost kind of gives me a leg up than maybe my competitors when I'm bidding for that project, right? Because now I have information, and especially knowledge, about how this town, how this state, how this county handles the whole process. Some of the issues we ran into on, maybe it could be even be adjacent property, or sometimes we've even found out that, hey, look, we actually surveyed this property, or we actually did environmental on this property 3-4 years ago, right? So again, that historical information and AI kind of pulls that together into a concise summary for me.
And on a really practical example, I actually saw this yesterday at a presentation, was and this product it's like used by contractors, but the idea was that you're a contractor, you get a CD set or a revision, and it's comparing the current to the previous set. And one of the items it caught was some sort of sewer project, and there was a switch from PVC to some sort of metallic pipe. And it ended up being, it was $150,000 change order for this specific change, and nobody caught it because it wasn't clouded on the revision set. And it just got me thinking, right? Because I'm like, well, how useful would that be to a designer just to back check your own work before it goes out?
Yeah. And again, like even from that standpoint too, like how many times, especially in your industry as well, right? We're always asked to value engineer our plans, right? What are the alternatives that we can use, right? It could be type of stormwater system, water quality devices, right? There's numerous, types of devices out there, right? And they all vary in price. They vary in maintenance as well, right? The types of pipe that you're using, right? So again, AI, again, from a design engineer standpoint, that is something that as they're working on the design and the plan, they can also be exploring that as well. So,
exactly.
It's a tool, right? It's not the end all be all, right? It's a valuable tool that can help us with our designs and so forth.
Absolutely. And Ron, if you got firm leaders out in the audience, right, and they're like, just want one thing I can take away from today to help me run my projects better, where do they start?
Look, the biggest thing, like I said before, is you can get overwhelmed, right? You really need to look at your business model as far as what you do, right? Because every business is different, they operate differently and so forth. But I think the biggest thing is really the ability to leverage and streamline your workflows, querying large amounts of data. And again, when you look at the data, sometimes you have mass amounts of internal data. Sometimes you're searching exterior. The thing you need to take into consideration when you're looking at internal data is really what are your IT safeguards, right? Because you always hear the horror stories how, AI can go into your internal documents, and then all of a sudden you're finding out all sorts of, proprietary information that maybe you shouldn't be, aware of and so forth, right? So again, really setting those safeguards and really being able to identify whether it's an internal or external, but again, it's really a tool that aids early stage regulatory review and just supports value engineering overall.
Absolutely. And really well said, Ron. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. So if the audience has questions for you, wants to connect, wants to find out more about what you guys are doing, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I always tell people the best way to reach me is through email. You can go to our website. All my contact information is provided there. So yeah, I'd be more than happy, to help others, especially if they have questions and so forth. I mean, look, this is an industry, even though we are competitors and it is a competitive market, we're always at, networking events and stuff. And we talk, hey, what are you doing different? How are you addressing this? So again, it's not like, I'm going to pull back on certain things or give you the right information, but like I said, I'd be more than happy to speak with anybody that has questions.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part about our industry, Ron. Super collaborative, and we're all here to help each other. Ron, again, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Great. Thank you, Nick.
Yes, sir, of course. Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aectechpodcast.com. There, you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all your engineering and technology endeavors.